So, news came out, and I have to correct myself from the previous video, if you will, but news came out that AEW Collision is going to be premiering at around the end of June on a Saturday night, but instead of being like around 60 airing, I should say, around 6:05 like the old WCW Saturday night used to, that instead it's going to be around 8 between 8 and 10, basically a 2-hour show airing between 8 and 10 on Saturday night. Now, the reason for this apparently, the reason for this apparently, according to reports, is it's being done as, part of a soft, reset for the roster. And mainly when I say that, as a soft reset, basically what I'm talking about is it's AEW's own interpretation of a brand split. And the difference though with this is apparently, according to reports, Collision is being done so that CM Punk will have a show to be part of, upon his return to AEW, and he won't have to deal with any behind the scenes drama or anything with the Elite, and the Elite will then be left to Dynamite and Rampage. Now this soft brand split, if you will, could mean a lot of things. It can mean a lot of things. Like they could go back and forth. Collision on some weeks could have Punk as a focal point, along with talent being able to perform in the ring, get some stories progress as they do. And then Dynamite could be the Elite's show for a few weeks, but then maybe they switch. And then Punk's on Dynamite for a few weeks and the Elite's on Collision. Who knows? But apparently that's one of the main reasons it's being done, because of the situation behind the scenes with CM Punk and the Elite. Even though Punk, and I think even by extension Omega, have made it clear that they would love nothing more than to, put this behind them and move forward. Do what's right for the company. But it doesn't seem like that's the case. And because that doesn't seem like that's going to be the case for quite some time, is the reason why Collision is going to be set up the way it is. Now, obviously, this does give some majority of the roster more exposure, especially the talent that wants to get over and get their names out there. It gives them more exposure and everything by being able to now show up on another 2-hour show known as Collision, along with also showing up on Dynamite and even afterwards Rampage on Wednesday and Friday. So now they'll have 3 out of the final 4 days of the week to basically showcase in front of the world, what they could do, and apply their craft. But here's the thing: not a lot of people are fond about this because they feel like this is just an immature answer to an easy resolution. And the easy resolution, even I said this in a recent video, is Tony Khan taking Punk and the Elite, sitting them down, finally putting his foot down at the same time, showing that he's the boss, and telling them, look, work this out, talk this out right now, so that we can make some money out of it, and then maybe talking to the roster who might still be indifferent about Punk or not, and saying, hey, if you don't want to be here because CM Punk's here, there's the door. I'll gladly let you out of your contract. But then maybe add on the fact that, hey, there's not that many choices right now out there, so it's up to you. Do you want to be unemployed and not get booked as much? Or do you want to basically put your ego aside and say, okay, I'll do what's right for the company? He needs to basically, as I said in the previous video, needs to put his foot down, and this is his opportunity to do so. And that's another thing a lot of people do agree with, that this is something that he needs to put his foot down, look at Punk, look at the Elite, and say, work this out, talk this out, and once you do, let's see how we can make money off this. That's what he needs to do, because if not, what we're getting with Collision being a show of its own merit and basically being its own little brand, not as much as, let's say, a SmackDown Raw situation in WWE, but still it's like its own little brand. It's like, what's the point of even making it its own little brand if it's not really a separate brand? You know, if it's not really, going to have its own championships and everything, and it's just members of the roster that, appear on Dynamite, appear on Rampage, appear on Dark and Dark Elevation. What's the point of it being its own little brand if they're also going to show up on Collision, and the only thing that's different about it is you take the Elite out and you put Punk in their place when it comes to Collision. What's the big difference? There is no big difference. It's just Punk's going to be the focal point of Collision. The Elite are going to be the focal point of Dynamite, and maybe at times you switch it over, and then the Elite become focal points of Collision, and Punk becomes focal points of Dynamite, and it's like, what's the point of doing this if, what's the point of really doing this if it's just going to add on more programming, which is a good thing, for all of wrestling, but for AEW, what's the point of it if this additional programming is just so that you don't have any more backstage drama? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, especially if you're going to have some of the roster agree, to put their differences aside and work on the same show as Punk's on, and maybe even work with him, or those that are happy to, that Punk's coming back, friends with him, wanting to be more willing to be on Collision than Dynamite. And let's not forget, Dynamite is AEW's Nitro. Dynamite is AEW's Monday Night Raw. That's what it is. Collision, what's it going to be? The Thunder, the SmackDown? And the only difference is the headlining acts? One headlining act's not going to be on Collision because of what the other? It's like, what? It's like, what sense does this really make, in the long run, if majority of the roster is willing to put their differences aside, their egos aside, to work on Collision, to get more exposure, maybe even work with Punk as a result to get that exposure, if they're still going to be able to get exposure and stuff on Dynamite and Rampage? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that they're will, if that's going to happen, and this is being called, a soft reset, a soft, brand split, in AEW, because it's not. The only thing that makes it that way is Punk's going to be the focal point of Collision, and the Elite of Dynamite, and then once in a while you'll switch it over, and Punk will be the focal point of Dynamite and the Elite of Collision. It just does not make any sense. It just does not make any freaking sense in the long run, and I think AEW and Tony Khan know that. And again, it's like I said, Tony Khan needs to take this opportunity to show he is indeed the boss of all Elite Wrestling, and what he says goes. What begins with him ends with him. And if he wants the Elite to put their differences aside and work with Punk, he's going to make sure that happens. He needs to make sure that happens so that there is no confusion, for the fans when it comes to this roster and everything. There's no confusion whatsoever. The thing is, I'm in agreement with a lot of people when he says Tony Khan's fingers on the pulse of probably one of the best realistic shoot-style storylines professional wrestling has ever seen in quite some time. All he has to do is press that button. He, pull back on that trigger and say, let's do it. Let's make some damn money. Especially if you want to try to sell out 80 to 90,000 seats at Wembley Stadium for All In. So he needs to prove he's a boss here. He needs to prove he is the boss. This is his company, and that what he says goes, and if you don't like it, get the hell out. That's what he needs to do. And more specifically, he needs to do that when it comes to the situation with the Elite and CM Punk. That's what he needs to do. But, speaking of Collision, like I said, we hear it's going to be some kind of its own little brand. The only thing, like I mentioned, is Punk's going to be the focal point, and a lot of the roster is going to get more exposure, especially those who want to get their names out and all that. That's good. That's great. But let's talk about the time slot. Let's talk about the time slot here, guys, as I check something. Let's talk about the time slot. Let's talk about the fact that, according to reports, it's scheduled to air on Saturday nights between 8 and 10. Question. whose dumb idea was that? I mean, seriously, whose dumb idea was that? Oh, we're gonna put Collision. We're gonna have our new AEW show known as Collision, airing on Saturday nights between 8 and 10. Do people not understand? Do those people at Warner Brothers Discovery that's telling Tony Khan this is when you're gonna air Collision? Do they not understand? Do they not get, ladies and gentlemen? Do they not understand? Do they not get that at that time, especially nowadays, folks are out and about on Saturday nights? That they're either at, especially during the summer, they're either at baseball games, they're either at county fairs, state fairs, they're either out watching, they're either at the cinemas or the drive-ins, or they're still around watching a movie. Do they not understand people are not going to be home? I mean, what are they going to hope for? What are they going to rely on? What, the DVR recordings, the on-demand viewings? Because that's probably what you're going to have to rely on. It's probably what you're going to have to do. Because, seriously, how many people, even on the debut night of Collision in Chicago at the United Center, which is rumored when CM Punk returns, how many people are going to tune into that, especially during the summer, if they could be out and about doing whatever the hell they want? And entertaining themselves in other ways. It's like, what's the point? Whose idea was that? To me, that is a dumb time slot. Now, if you want to say, between 5 and 6 or 6 and 7, hey, that's better. Because you know what made WCW Saturday Night popular? That time slot. You want to pay homage to WCW and wrestling on the Turner Networks? You use that time slot. Because between 8 and 10 does not work. It doesn't. It does not work whatsoever. Because a lot of people, immediately after 7 o'clock, if they, want to, they will go out and enjoy themselves doing something else. They will not decide to dedicate their Saturday nights between 8 and 10 to watch professional wrestling unless they make a living talking about it. So to me, that time slot is the dumbest time slot I could ever imagine. So to me, whoever came up with that at Warner Brothers Discovery, you need to reconfigure that time, the airing for this show, rethink this time slot, and probably go back to that traditional between 6 and 7, or 5 and 6, if you will. But yeah, these are just my thoughts on the AEW Collision show and why it's happening, why CM Punk is going to be the focal point and everything, and why in a way it doesn't really make sense if a majority of the roster is going to also be on there. The only difference is the headlining acts. So to me, I do agree. Tony Khan, as I said before, needs to step up, put his foot down, show why he's the boss, and tell Punk and the Elite, work this out because there's money to be made. Let him know his finger is on the pulse, his finger is on the trigger to make this storyline become a reality and put AEW on the map outside of doing the all-in thing. But those are just my thoughts, guys. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. How do you feel about it? What do you think of the time slot as well? And I will talk to y'all later.